Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is When Gamers Talk. Today we will be breaking down the top 5 reasons not to support the death penalty. Constitutionality. Rather than try to patch up the death penalty's legal wounds one at a time, I would ask for a full briefing on a more basic question: whether the death penalty violates the Constitution. The relevant legal standard is the standard set forth in the English Amendment. The Constitution therefore forbids the infliction of cruel and unusual punishment, Amendment 8. The court has recognized that a claim that punishment is excessive is judged not by the standards that prevailed in 1685, or when the Bill of Rights was adopted, but rather by those that currently prevail. Indeed, the Constitution prohibits various gruesome punishments that were common. This quote came from Stephen G. Breyer, J.D., Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, dissenting opinion in Glossop v. Gross. In 1976, the court thought that the constitutional infirmities in the death penalty could be healed. The court, in effect, delegated significant responsibility to the state to develop procedures that would protect against those constitutional problems. Almost 40 years of studies, surveys, and experience strongly indicate, however, that this effort has failed. Today's administration of the death penalty involves 3 fundamental constitutional defects. 1. Serious unreliability, 2. Arbitrariness in application, and 3. Very long delays that undermine the death penalty's penological purpose. Perhaps as a result, 4. Most places with the United States have abandoned its issue. For the reasons I've set forth in this opinion, I believe it highly likely that the death penalty violates the 8th Amendment. I would just like to remind everyone to show your support for the channel. Every single like, comment, and the second of your day you spend on my channel is a blessing and helps me reach more and more audiences around the world. That being said, don't forget to subscribe and let me know your thoughts on the video down below in the comments. What hot topic issue would you like to know more about? Deterrence. A quote from John J. Donahue III, J.D., Ph.D., Professor of Law at Stanford University, says there is not the slightest credible statistical evidence that capital punishment reduces the rate of homicide, whether one compares the similar movements of homicide in Canada and the US, when only the latter restored the death penalty, or in American states that have abolished it versus those that retain it, or in Hong Kong and Singapore, the first abolishing the death penalty in the mid-1990s and the second greatly increasing its usage at the same. There is no detectable effect of capital punishment on crime. The best econometric studies reach the same conclusion. Last year, roughly 14,000 murders were committed, but only 35 executions took place. Since murders typically expose themselves to far greater immediate risks, the likelihood is incredibly remote that some small chance of execution many years after committing a crime will influence the behavior of a sociopathic deviant who would otherwise be willing to kill if his only penalty were life imprisonment. Any criminal who actually thought he would be caught would find the prospect of life without parole to be a monumental penalty. Any criminal who didn't think he would be caught would be untroubled by any sanction. Per Richard C. Dieter, MS, JD, former executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center, stated, "One of the most common misperceptions about the death penalty is the notion that the death penalty saves money because executed defendants no longer have to be cared for at the state's expense. If the cost of the death penalty were to be measured at the same time of an execution, that might indeed be true, but as every prosecutor, defense attorney, and judge knows, the cost of a capital case begin long before the sentence is carried out. Experienced prosecutors and defense attorneys must be assigned and begin a long period of investigation and pretrial hearings. Jury selection, the trial itself, and initial appeals will consume years of time and enormous amounts of money before an execution is on the horizon. All of the studies conclude that the death penalty system is far more expensive than an alternative system in which the maximum sentence is life in prison." Attorney quality. Perhaps the most important factor in determining whether a defendant will receive the death penalty is the quality of representation he or she is provided. Almost all defendants in capital cases cannot afford their own attorneys. In many cases, the appointed attorneys are overworked, underpaid, or lacking the trial experience required for death penalty cases. There have been instances in which lawyers appointed to a death case were so inexperienced that they were completely unprepared for the sentencing phase of the trial. Other appointed attorneys have slept through parts of the trial or arrived at the court under the influence of alcohol. The right to an attorney is a vital hallmark of the American judicial system. It is essential that the attorney be experienced in capital cases, be adequately compensated, and have access to the resources needed to fulfill his or her obligations to the client and the court. This is information per Death Penalty Information Center. Morality. A direct quote from Simon Frank Thompson, former superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary. As superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary, I planned and carried out the state's only 2 executions in the last 54 years. I used to support the death penalty. I don't anymore. I was charged with executing 2 inmates on the penitentiary death row, Douglas Franklin Wright and Harry Charles Moore. Regardless of their crimes, the fact that I was now to be personally involved in their executions forced me into a deeper reckoning with my feelings about capital punishment. After much contemplation, I became convicted that on a moral level, life was either hallowed or it wasn't, and I wanted it to be. Since I retired from corrections in 2010, my mission has been to persuade people that capital punishment is a failed policy. America should no longer accept the myth that the capital punishment plays any constructive role in our criminal justice system. It will be hard to bring an end to the death penalty, but we will be a healthier society as a result. In conclusion, the death penalty will presumably remain a big issue in the United States for many years to come. Most of us aren't politicians, so it's good for us to have a stance on something seemingly either fundamentally broken or fundamentally important to the United States. Of course, last but definitely not least, God bless.